Welcome, Deline, to the Working Mumma podcast. How's your day going so far?
Well, we've just been talking about how it's been a bit stressful trying to get online, but yeah, going well.
Now, this is the second time you've come on the podcast, which I'm very excited about because the first one I felt like we could have just chatted all day. And one of those topics that we did talk about was about childcare. So we're going deeper today about childcare, the cost of it, because also you've done a lot of work as well with the parenthood. Do you want to just give people a bit of a recap as well, who you are, what you do, and also how many kids you have? Because I think it also gives good context to childcare.
Definitely. So my name's Deline. I am a financial advisor. I've been an advisor for about 12 years and been in financial services about 16 years. I live in Brisbane and I have two children who are now 5 years old and 7 years old. So they're in prep and grade two at school. And so I'm now finished my childcare journey. And that's why I've been able to go back and do a bit of numbers and assessments and all of that. But yeah, that's a little bit about me, I guess.
Yeah, very cool. So we'll just hit it right off the bat. How much have you spent on childcare with your two kids? And also, actually, we'll premise that as well. How many days were they in childcare and what type of care did you have? We'll probably start with that.
Yeah. So we did a few different things. We both, my husband and I both took turns at working part-time and flexibly because I started my own business a bit over 3 years ago that played into that flexibility. And there was a period of time where I worked part-time and there was a period of time where my husband worked part-time. So first of all, we did that. We also used traditional childcare centres, long day daycare centres. So we didn't use like family daycare or anything like that. And then we have also had some family support fairly close by. So our parents both live 1 hour away. So it's a 2 hour round trip, but still, close enough to get help when needed. And then there was a period of time in that sort of 7 years of childcare, we also had an au pair for about 15 months as well. So we've kind of done a mixture of things and juggled different things at different points in time. In terms of how much we've spent, so now that we've ended that journey, I went back and looked at what was the out of pocket cost after any subsidies. And we spent $150,000 on childcare after subsidies for two children over that 7 years period. And on average, because at first I was like, that's actually less than what I thought. But then when I worked out how many days they were going to childcare on average, it averaged at 3.5 days a week for each child over that period of time, because there was sometimes they did 2 days, sometimes they did 5 days, like there was just different periods of different amounts. So it averaged at 3.5 days at $150,000 for the two kids is the summary of that.
So, as a financial advisor, I'm thinking you probably like, right, we could do a lot with that money, but obviously the childcare has cost a lot of money. How did you go about, I guess, saving? Did you plan for that? Or was it just like,
Yeah.
right, this is what we've got to do for our period in our lives?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd often hear clients tell me how expensive childcare is, but it wasn't until I was in the thick of it. So I knew it was expensive, but once I actually had to part with the money as well, then I was like, wow, this is really expensive, because there were periods of time where the childcare expense was more than our mortgage. So yes, we didn't do anything special in terms of planning for the fees. I think as well I was a little bit naive because I did start having my children like in my later 20s, like 27 and then 30. So I was probably like a little bit naive in a way as well when it came to that. But we've always been, I guess my husband's an accountant, I'm a financial advisor. So we've always been quite good with money, and we've always made sure that we've had a strong surplus. So we knew we'd be able to cash flow that kind of expense. But in saying that, like, I totally appreciate in this day and age, it's a little bit different because mortgage prices are a lot larger than what they were when I took out a mortgage a number of years ago. So there's that aspect. And then there's also the aspect around just like the cost of living in general is just like it's so much more expensive to raise children these days. So there are sometimes I see clients where you really do need to be planning in advance to create some buffers in the cash flow plan to draw down on those savings to be able to meet mortgage expense and early childhood education expenses.
Yeah, it's certainly huge. I know in myself that, yeah, after mortgage, childcare has definitely been my biggest expense. And also, I remember doing this last year. It's gone up in the last 7 years. I think I'm paying 40% more on an
Mm-hmm.
average daily rate than what I was when we first started on the journey. And when you're getting the 10, 15% increases, that's something that you can't necessarily budget for because
Right.
the increases are well above CPI of what many of these centres, and it even come out recently in the 730 report and also Four Corners, 75% are owned by private equity companies.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say that they're all getting it for profits. And I know for me, it really grates on me that this is what I'm, funding essentially. But on the flip side, have you then seen the benefits of then your children going to childcare? Because I know some people will weigh it up. Is it worth going still to childcare, and should I just stay home and things like that? That there's obviously benefits for both the child, but also
Mm.
traditionally the mother as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken about this a number of times, Karina, where we both feel that we could not be a 100% stay-at-home parent and do 100% of those caring duties. It would, yeah, I really get a lot of purpose and value out of the work that I do. So it has been really important for me to continue in the paid workforce. And there's obviously been financial benefits to continuing in the paid workforce. So because I did have my children, my first child in particular, I was 27, I was still trying to get my career, really up and running as a financial advisor. And I know my husband was really keen on me to get back to work pretty soon so that I didn't lose momentum with my career trajectory. So I went back to work after my son was 5 months and just went back 2 days a week and then went up to 3 days, 4 days. And then by the time he was 18 months, I was back at 5 days. And then with my daughter, when I had her, I decided just to go back to work full time because I kind of learned, and again, these are discussions that we've had previously, I kind of learned that I was still doing like full-time work, but just getting paid part-time hours for it. So I decided to go straight back to full-time work. So financially, there's been the monetary aspect, but also the superannuation, because when I went down that rabbit hole of looking at how much have we spent on childcare, it got me looking at my superannuation to see how that had been going. So it's definitely been worthwhile. And then the other aspect has been obviously like the career trajectory and exposure and experiences and all that sort of stuff. Whereas if I had maybe worked less, maybe it would have been a bit slower to get to where I am now, and especially when I've started my business and things like that. So definitely financial aspects that have been beneficial. And then in terms of the kids, yeah, they like do so much great stuff at early childhood education that I would not even know what to do. So I think it's been really beneficial for their education, their development, their social skills, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's been great. I just wish our educators did get valued better in terms of their expertise in the field.
Oh, 100%. Even when I know all the pay was happening last year and things, I would go back to my educators and say, we value you. Please just stay in the industry. And it's hard when you hear of educators leaving to go to other centres, which unfortunately there is a high turnover in this industry. And
Yeah.
you're thinking, why can't these centres just value it? We're paying through the roof of fees. Why can't it actually end up with the educators rather than the corporate, you know,
Yeah.
pockets? But it's a system, as we know, needs reform. And even if there is $10 a day childcare, like, the Parenthood and Thrive by Five are advocating for, it still doesn't change sometimes the systemic issues that we know they're involved with the whole industry.
Yeah.
So, how did you? What actually? I'll reframe that. What do you then say to your clients if they're coming to you and saying, "Deline, what do I do about childcare? How do I fund it? Can I plan for it before we even had kids?" Because I know that I didn't. Luckily, same with you, we had a bit of a surplus. But also, when I was on maternity leave, I actually didn't drop down my son with his days at childcare. We decided to keep it, which is a huge expense as well,
Yes.
because I didn't want to take him out. But how can, if someone's listening now, if they've got one child, maybe going up to two, or even just considering even having a child, what would you say of, can we plan for childcare? How should we plan for it, or even budget for it as well?
Mm. So the majority of people I see, they will come to me after they've had their first child, and the same kind of reality check that I had. Holy moly, this is expensive. And then they're like, we want to have a second child, third child, whatever it is. How are we going to be able to afford to do this? So that's usually the trigger for a lot of people to come get advice, generally in their like 30s and 40s. That's usually that sort of time frame. Not many people come to me before they decide to have children. So sometimes they'll come to me before, when they're looking to make other investments like purchase their first home and things like that. And then as part of the advice, I then prompt further and say, okay, well, what does the rest of our life look like? Are we planning to have children, so that we can build all of that into the plan? So incidentally, I guess they're getting that sort of advice. For the majority of people, though, it is going to be simply a cash flow thing. So for the first child in particular, so usually you'll cash flow that. For second and subsequent children, that's where, like you said, most people usually do keep their first or previous children in care, because like anyone that's got multiple children know how difficult that is to keep them all
Yeah,
home.
for sure.
And like we've talked about, their development, like it's so important for them to stay and get that social aspect and the development they get there. So in that case, that's when we sit down and go, okay, what are all our expenses, our loan repayments, our living expenses, our education fees, all that kind of stuff. What income do we have coming in? So if one parent is working, if we're getting paid parental leave from another parent, like what does that all look like? And then trying to forecast what the gap will be, and then working out a target on how much savings we need to have to kind of fund that area. And then also trying to build in a buffer, if you can, in case we have something like interest rate rises, which we're not expecting that right now, but whoever's listening to this in the future, you might need to think about that kind of stuff as well.
And we also know that, unfortunately, generally every year in July and also in January, there will be on average anywhere between probably a 4 and 8% increase in
Yeah.
childcare fees as well. So they don't even consider CPI. The big ones will actually come out with a number of excuses and reasons for increases, and it won't happen once a year. Generally, on average, come June, there'll be another letter that'll be sent out, and you'll say, right, you've got this. And unfortunately, you cannot negotiate, just
Yes.
like with the banks and interest rates. You can't do it. And often you can't shop around for another childcare because every other centre is about the same price, or they're also full.
Right. And I think that's a really good point. When I do my financial advice to my clients, I might use CPI for living expenses. We'll build in every year your expenses are going to go up by X amount, and we'll assume your salary goes up as well, but not as much as CPI. So we're always being conservative. So we might say your salary will go up by 2%, but inflation might be 3% or whatever it is. But for education costs, we always build in a much bigger buffer. So I usually do a minimum of 5%. And then when it comes to like other private schooling for primary school or high school, we might even build in something a bit higher, like 7.5%, 10%. It kind of depends on the school. So I think that's a really good point. It is important to factor in higher than CPI in those calculations.
Yeah. And is there anything else around like what you've, from your experiences
Mm.
around, I guess, paying for childcare and early education and going through the system?
Mm.
Anything else that you'd want to say to people about the experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I guess I probably want to just spend a moment and just explain a little bit about the timeline of things to kind of give some more context as well, to just explain to people that it is an ever evolving sector. So, when I went back to work after my first child, there was actually a cap in place on the childcare subsidy. So, it was about $10,000 a year. So, that meant you could get $10,000 subsidies a max. That worked out for the majority of people. It worked out 3 days that you could get
Mm.
subsidy on. And then if you wanted to work a fourth and fifth day and have your child in care on a fourth and fifth day, you're paying full price. So this is where we then looked at our village that you often talk about in your podcast. We looked at our village and said, any grandparent want to help
Yeah.
out? And then this is why we've also taken turns to work kind of part-time. So I had worked out, because at that point in time, the decision was, I know it's a family expense, but the decision was, do I work part-time at that point, or do we go and do extra care 4 or 5 days? And I worked out that on that fourth and fifth day, I'd be working for about $7 an hour. And so that didn't feel like it was worth it to take that time away from my child at that point. Then, when I had my second child, that was during COVID. And during that time, there was some free childcare, like nil out of pocket expense. So that was a great relief during that time. My husband and I were both considered essential workers. So we continued to send our son to childcare. And then when I had to send my daughter to childcare, we also got an au pair. And we did that because I knew I wanted to go back to work full time at that point, but needed that additional support. And we couldn't really get our parents to help, the grandparents to help, because it was COVID times. It was just a little bit more higher risk to have our parents helping. So we decided to have an au pair live with us. We essentially found her through Facebook, and we were so fortunate to find her because there was hardly any au pairs in the country at that time. So yeah, the kids built an amazing relationship. We got really lucky. She was a bit more mature, so she was kind of mid-20s. She'd cared for lots of children before. Her brothers were living near us as well, so I think that was part of the reason why she chose us. And yeah, it was an amazing relationship. We often look back at that time and think, gosh, life was so
Yeah.
good back then because we had that extra set of hands. And I just want to I guess set the expectation that au pairs are not slaves. They're not doing everything in the household. Like, her duties were to look after, when she had the children, it was to look after the children. So she wasn't doing housework, she wasn't doing washing, she wasn't cooking, she wasn't doing any of that stuff. Her duties were childcare arrangements.
Mm.
Then once she left us, that's roughly when the additional subsidy for second or more children came into place. So that's where, if you've got 2 children under the age of 6 in care, the second child can get an additional 30% subsidy.
Makes a huge difference as well.
Huge difference. And then coupled with me I started my business around that time. So I pretty much had no income as well. So we had the 2 kids in, I think it was still like 3 days of childcare, because then my husband also went down to part-time work to help me get my business off the ground. So he took on a lot of those domestic duties. And then the year after that, my son started school. So we just had one child, and my husband was still part-time. So we just had one child in childcare. And now we've got them both in school. So that's kind of like the background around it as to how we've kind of managed the 3 days of childcare, and I guess the fees, how they've changed over time. And I guess I just wanted to bring that up because, we're both very involved with the parenthood and those advocacy groups. And sometimes I have people message me and go, oh, it would have been nice if this was when I had my children in care. Yes, I agree, but also let's pave the way forward for the future, the women and the parents in the future. So yes, would have been nice for us too, but let's look to the future and make it a better place.
Yeah, and I think it also really shows the impact of government legislation on the childcare sector. I remember, yeah, when the $10,000 a year subsidy actually got removed, it made a huge difference. I know even a friend of mine, she was paying through the roof because her daughter was going 4 days a week, and it was part of the motherhood penalty of you can't
Yes.
go back full time because you're only going to get 3 days a week childcare. where now
Yeah.
you get that has been removed since Labor came into power 3 years ago. So we're recording this 2025. And they're actually then made the reforms, the additional child subsidy, which has made a big difference. And also now they're wanting, actually they've reduced the barriers also to actually show that you are
Mm,
working or you're looking for a job. So a lot of the legislative changes have actually had direct impact and a positive impact as well, because often, as you would say, that there's been a lot of barriers to actually preventing predominantly women going back full time if that's what they wish to do. It used to be, right, you're essentially incentivized financially to go back 3 days and that's it. So
mm.
sometimes as well, I know with this topic, it's made me a lot more political. And I had an interesting, I would say, debate with my mum in the lead up to the last election. She goes, Karina, not everything's about it, childcare. And I'm thinking, yes, it is. So,
It's got a huge impact to the flow on effects
yeah.
of everything. Yeah.
And it can really then obviously the family dynamics and things as well. So, you might not be political if you're listening, but definitely pay good attention. And that's where I think the amazing work that, as we say, the Parenthood, Thrive by Five are also doing in this space, because they are actually having direct impacts in a positive way to actually transform the sector. We may
Yes.
think, yes, it would have been nice back in the day, but even, 20 years ago, there was actually not the subsidies as what we have these days. They've also increased the subsidies as well. So it used to be capped if your family income, quote me if I'm
Yes.
wrong, was $360,000. Now it's 530-ish
Yes.
$1,000. Sounds like a lot of money, but also if you've got two parents working full time in a corporate role, you can actually tip over that pretty quickly.
I see it quite often, especially for people that, and this is a big one as well, where we've got a couple, they might be on strong salaries already, but then they do get potential bonuses or they get employee
Mm.
shares. And then when those shares vest, they're considered taxable income, or they might get a bonus, and then they have to potentially pay back childcare subsidies, or they just have to report that they think they're going to get a bonus and cash flow full fare childcare. So there's different things that can really impact, even though cash flow wise, you're really feeling tight for most of the year. And it's only when you get that bonus or those shares, that vest, that you can then see that injection of cash into the household.
Yeah, and I'm also reflecting on it quite a lot at the moment of it's kind of like that short-term pain, particularly from a financial perspective.
Yeah.
But the long-term gains are definitely I've seen in my kids, is what you've said, but also, as you're saying, around the superannuation and also the career. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, the financials, yes, but also you said something earlier. It's not, don't just look at this as a female's expense
Yeah.
either as well. Look at this, I'm sure people as well, don't look at childcare, like, sorry, grocery shopping as just a one person's expense. Same thing with childcare, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I wanted to also share one other calculation that I had done. So $150,000, I was like, what position would I be in if I had not spent that on childcare? And so I did a projection. It took me a little while because I thought, let's see if I had just put that onto my mortgage, what that would look like. And it was a bit hard to work out because obviously we've had so many interest rate changes over the period of time. And then also my childcare fees changed so
Yeah.
many times as well. But I worked out that I would have been able to pay off my home loan around 9 years earlier with that
Wow.
$150,000. So it is a significant financial impact, but like you said, it is short term. And that would be my advice to anyone who is worried about the cost, or, I like a lot of my clients, I just explain to them that for this period of time, you're pretty much going sideways for some people. Don't worry that you're not getting ahead, because you will see light at the end of the tunnel. So just get through it, kind of thing, in terms financially. And if you're not going into debt, that's a good thing. If you're just staying sideways, that's a good thing. You will get through it. And it is short term, and think about those longer term impacts, definitely.
Yeah, being a new parent, it's probably, wouldn't you say it's one of the most expensive periods of your life, with often it's cars, houses, kids all happen within a relatively short space of time.
Yes, definitely. All those things.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you would like to share, or I guess reflections or advice for parents that are going through childcare and sorry, early education, and and tips and things like that. I know that choosing a center, we could probably spend a whole other episode on choosing centers and that kind of transition and as well. And I know even going into sessional kinder, that can also then have a financial impact as
Yes.
well. So are there anything else that you want to share or some insights?
Yeah, I guess the other thing I wanted to say is that while I've been saying, oh, it's a short period of time, it will get a bit easier. Now that both my children are in school, so when my son went started school over 2 years ago, I then got to the end of the year and then calculated he goes to a Catholic school, so the fees are like $3,500 a year. So it's not a state school where there's like very minimal out of pocket costs, but it's also not like the cost of childcare
I
either.
know it seems cheap.
But then when I added up all the other stuff, because you got to factor in holiday care, because unless you're fortunate enough to take 10 weeks of leave throughout the year for school holidays, you have to factor in care. So we do a
Mm.
mixture of things. We do grandparents, we both take some time off work, then we'll do some holiday programs or like vacation care. So you got to factor in that. And then I know a lot of my clients have come back to me recently to say, oh my gosh, the cost of like holidays to, because you want to go do activities with your kids. This is time, this, valuable time. But the cost of doing anything with your children these days
Yeah.
is so expensive. So that's something to, I guess, factor in. And then, yeah, after school care or before school care, those sorts of things as well. So when I calculated, school fees, all the holiday and after school care, and again, they're not going full time, they go 3 days a week, and then like adding in, the school fees, all that kind of stuff, it still came to about $7,500 for the year. So I guess I just want to explain that it's not like you go from $15,000 down to nothing. There is still an expense there. So just don't get complacent, I guess, and think it's going to be heaps better, because it will be better, but there will still be a lot of other challenges. And I know I listened to your podcast episode when your son started school. I went back to listen to that when my daughter was starting this year as a bit of a refresher to hear your learnings again. And there's a lot of challenges that come with starting school, isn't there? So I guess just thinking about that. And then, because I guess the reason I wanted to bring that up is there's a lot of, we talk about the mental load a lot, burnout. So you've really got to do what's right for your family. And I really hope that in the future we can see, because I know a lot of your listeners are in hetero relationships. So we have a male and a female parent. And I know the research is very different for couples that are in
Mm.
same-sex relationships. But for hetero relationships, I really hope we see more dads being able to work part-time, taking parental leave. I feel like there's a lot of stigma still around that. And even my husband, when he was working part-time and working casually and things like that, he got so many unwelcomed questions like, oh, what are you doing on your days off? And I know that they were well intended, but he was like, it's not a day off. Like, I'm doing a lot of work in the household, I'm caring for my children. Like, it's actually way more work than working in a corporate setting.
Oh, 100%. I had someone the other day saying, oh, aren't you lucky you don't work Mondays? And I said, no joke. I come back to work for a break. I said, Mondays are the hardest day of the week. Doing errands, looking after my
Yes.
very active 4-year-old. And I'm like, I've got swimming lessons, I've got this, and they're like, oh, okay. And so I'm not rude about it, but I do shut it down of I'm not doing this
Yeah.
for, just for out of luxury. Yes, it's a short-term thing. Yes, I am taking a financial hit around it, but man, it's a lot more intense.
Yeah, 100%. So, I guess that's the other things that have come up with my reflection over the last few months while I've been looking back at those changes in my life and things like that. Yeah, so happy to, if you want to ask any other questions, I'm a pretty open book as much as I can be. So,
Yeah.
but I guess that's all my reflections that I've got to share.
No, that's amazing. And it's one thing we often think about the financial component, but there's also then a lot of other advantages. And I think also choosing the right care for what works for you
Yeah.
and your family. Because I know this year I've got my youngest son in sessional kindergarten,
Mm.
which has made a huge difference financially, except during school holidays, because then I have to put him back into early education again. So there's also sort of peaks and troughs of the expenses. But we did that for a family reason because also the educators have left kinder and we haven't had a consistent
Yeah.
teacher. So we've done it purely from a readiness for school perspective later in the year. There is a financial component, but also I have only been able to do that because my other son is already at school. So I'm already having to
Yeah.
do the juggle of school hours. If I had to do that 4 years ago, I considered it, but I just did not have
Yeah.
the option to do it. And even sometimes when he's at kinder, it's associated with the school. So I still have to pay after school care fees anyway.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons why you also chose to go that. So I think to your point, it's finding the care that works for you and your family and it evolves. I wouldn't say it's sometimes consistent,
Yeah.
but yeah, school holidays, they're still expensive. You still have, they're not as the same price as early education, but it's still an expense that can be
Yeah.
surprising. And you've got those, out of term periods and
Yeah.
it's useful.
And it really depends on the location. I've had some clients when I'll say, okay, get me the fees for holidays and stuff like that. And then some of my clients are still paying like $110, $130 a day before subsidy for vacation care. So
Mm,
it's not far off some early childhood centres. So
yeah.
it depends.
Yeah, it depends on the activity, depends on the
Yeah.
firm and things like that. But yeah, it depends what's happening. So, but I guess the moral of the story is it's okay. And this is a permission slip as well for you listening. It's okay to send your children to early education.
Yes.
There are benefits for both your child, but also for you, both short and also long term.
Yes, definitely. And I think it would be, I think we're also starting to see some shift as well. Like in the old days, it was like I know there's a really important aspect with being home with your children and, in those first 5 years. But I do think there's a bit more of a shift in a way. This is something I did where we're taking advantage of early childhood education hours and then cutting back during the school when they start school because
Mm.
the hours are less flexible, I guess.
Yeah, they're harder. They're so much harder.
So it's okay to do things in a non-traditional way as well.
Yeah. And ultimately, what works for you and your family.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I know we can talk about things for ages, but yeah, thank you so much, Deline. How can people get in touch with you?
Spend a lot of time on Instagram, so I'm at Muzzy Wealth, and that's probably the best way to get in touch. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. It's always such a great chat whenever we speak. So thank you so much. And I have to also say thank you so much for being vulnerable and actually sharing the total cost of fees. I know not everyone would probably do that. And when I get to my end of my early education adventure, I'm scared to see how much it will eventually be, but I think it's going to be up there at about 150K as well. So if you should see
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, I look forward to hearing about it. Not in a good
Yeah.
way, but just a nosy way, I guess.
Yeah, I'll share. I just know how much the fees have gone up. We're almost going over 200. I reckon it's going to hit 200K in, sorry, $200 a day in
Yeah.
July. So it'd be interesting.
Oh, 200. Yeah. Okay. Nice
Yeah.
to chat with you. We'll speak
Yeah. Thank you
soon.
so much.
Bye.